Similar precautions are underway in related ways. For example, tunnels and roads into and out of Manhattan have been shut down. Trading at the New York Stock Exchange has been suspended. The Pentagon, Capitol Building, White House, State Department, and Treasury have all been evacuated, and at least some of those buildings appear to have been targeted by terrorists, so it's a good thing they were evacuated. The President and First Lady have canceled the events they had scheduled for today, needless to say. The Associated Press learned earlier that the White House had been evacuated. And I see SRN News Bureau Chief Phil Fleischman joining me now with the latest update from the newsroom. Phil, what's happening?
Bob, we are getting a report from the AP that the second plane to hit the World Trade Center tower was American Airlines Flight, I believe, 11. It was hijacked shortly after takeoff from Boston, and it was headed to Los Angeles. And that is from the Associated Press.
Any word, Phil, of how many people may have been on board?
No word on that at this point. We will keep you posted.
Well, it goes without saying that our listeners will be praying for the victims and their families of that tragedy. Again, an American Airlines Flight 11 taking off from Boston this morning, apparently hijacked and deliberately crashed into one of the twin towers of the World Trade Center in New York as events of near apocalyptic dimension appear on our television screens this morning. And we ask our listeners to pray that America will remain at peace. And again, Phil Fleischman coming in from the newsroom with the latest developments. Phil, what's the latest development here in this ongoing tragedy?
We're just wondering when the developments are going to end and when there will be some peace here. But as of yet, that moment has not arrived. The latest word is, Bob, that part of the Pentagon has collapsed. And again, we apologize for bringing these pieces of information in snippets, but unfortunately, as you can imagine, in a situation like this, that is how we are getting them, and we are exercising judgment here and not trying to cause a panic. That is for sure. But CNN, as a reliable source on this story, is saying that part of the Pentagon has collapsed.
And the tragic montage continues to grow. Thank you, SRN News Director Phil Fleischman, with the latest details from the newsroom. I'm Bob Agnew, trying to keep you posted, ladies and gentlemen, as to the latest events. Now, coming up, this is the montage version I'm giving you, ongoing coverage. We will return to that shortly. We're about to break away, though, however, for a special report of a more concise nature from SRN News White House correspondent Greg Clugston. He'll be with you in just a few moments here, again, repeating the latest development in this ongoing tragedy. Portion of the Pentagon has collapsed.
This is an SRN News special report, a national emergency. I'm Greg Clugston in Washington. A series of terrorist attacks has thrust New York City and Washington into states of panic today. 2 planes crashed into the World Trade Center towers this morning. And now, within the past few minutes, both World Trade Center buildings, part of the skyline in New York City for years, have completely collapsed. And there it is a scene of total chaos, strewn debris, and casualties that are far too many to count at this point. We are hearing from American Airlines that its Flight 11 from Boston to Los Angeles was hijacked this morning, and that aircraft was one of the 2 planes crashing into the World Trade Center towers this morning just before or after 9 a.m. Now, here in the nation's capital, an aircraft crashed into the west side of the Pentagon, sparking a fire and evacuation, and as we have just learned, a partial collapse of that structure. And we're also told of a possible car bomb explosion outside the State Department in downtown Washington. President Bush has called the events a national tragedy.
Today we've had a national tragedy. 2 airplanes have crashed the World Trade Center in an apparent terrorist attack on our country.
The president has called for all federal resources to go not only to victims and families of these attacks, but also to go against the perpetrators of this now string of attacks. The president was speaking before these other attacks took place in Washington, D.C. He has canceled events in Florida and is reportedly now returning aboard Air Force One to Washington. The FAA, meanwhile, has grounded all flights nationwide, international flights headed to Washington and New York City being diverted to Canada. This has been an SRN News special report. I'm Greg Clugston in Washington.
And we continue now with our ongoing coverage of the barrage of terrorist attacks striking America. I'm Bob Agnew with your ongoing coverage. Thank you, Greg, for that concise report. Keeping you updated, ladies and gentlemen, on the latest developments, tragic as they may be, they come into us piecemeal here, and we're frankly, trying to keep track of them all. The portion of the Pentagon has collapsed. That is the latest word we get, the latest page turned in the ongoing barrage of terrorist horror to strike America today. Earlier, both towers of the twin towers of the World Trade Center, each struck with an airliner. In one case, apparently a hijacked airliner that had taken off and was deliberately crashed into the World Trade Center. Both of the twin towers have now collapsed as a result of the damage they have sustained. A portion of the Pentagon said to now have collapsed as a result of the plane that struck that structure. Earlier, we had a report that a car bomb had exploded outside the State Department building. Let me make sure that I'm getting my facts not confused there. We have trading suspended on Wall Street. All subways in New York shut down, of course. Some of the debris from the first plane to strike the World Trade Center landed in Brooklyn, 3 miles away. Here we have a confirmation from the Associated Press, at least, that they had reported a car bomb exploded outside the State Department building here in Washington.
Well, as you have been telling us, Bob, and sharing with our listeners, these reports are coming in sort of drip by drip, and the latest that we're hearing is that there is a large plane has crashed in western Pennsylvania. Now, that is a bulletin that has just moved across the Associated Press newswire. We have no other details at this point. We don't know if it's in fact related to what has been happening in New York City or in Washington this morning. As you just mentioned, and as we just heard, the Federal Aviation Administration has stopped all flights nationwide. So whether this reported large plane crash in western Pennsylvania was perhaps involved in trying to make an emergency landing, trying to be diverted to another landing strip because of the FAA announcement, we simply don't know at this point. But these reports continue to be coming into the newsroom here.
Thank you, Greg. Now, the tragedy began about 9 a.m. Eastern Time this morning when we saw on our TV screens an airplane crash into the World Trade Center, or at least we saw the aftermath of that crash. Later, we saw another airliner, apparently on purpose, crash into the other of the twin towers of the World Trade Center. They have both now since collapsed. The Pentagon has been struck, Greg, and it looks as though, late word is that a portion of the Pentagon, the building that represents our national security, humanly speaking, has collapsed. News headlines, some of the...
Well, we're going to just interrupt right there, and then we're going to continue with coverage this morning from the different news services. But many folks are already calling, and they're beginning prayer vigils. And right now there's a prayer vigil that's going to be set up and beginning tonight at 7 o'clock at First Baptist Church in Somerset. They're asking for area pastors and folks, laymen, to come and to pray for America. That's going to be at 7 o'clock tonight at First Baptist Church in Somerset. Now, Herschel Walker also calling from the Corbin area. We also hope that we'll hear from a number of areas. If you're going to organize a prayer meeting tonight, we need you to call the studio here and inform us, and I'm sure people will want to gather to pray for America at this time during the time of her attacks by the different terrorists. Now, you can call the studio here at 679-6300, or we have a toll-free number. We hope to hear from Cookeville, Tennessee, somebody down there organizing a prayer meeting. We need to call in all those that will pray. I don't think we need to limit it to a certain denomination. Just call folks to come in and pray for America. Now, right now, again, for you folks that have been listening to the SRN News, there have been terrorist attacks against the World Trade Center. Both of those buildings have collapsed. On Manhattan Island, there's no telling how much damage has been done in the surrounding buildings, as well as there are literally thousands of people that are dead, and that's not confirmed, but that's an estimate. And then also at the Pentagon, in Washington, D.C., also folks have injured at least there, and the Pentagon, parts of it has collapsed. And there's also been another air traffic problem in Pennsylvania where an aircraft couldn't find an airport and crashed. And so there's a lot of difficult times at this moment. So we're asking you to pray tonight at 7 o'clock. First Baptist Church in downtown Somerset has opened up their buildings for a prayer meeting tonight at 7 o'clock to pray for America. And if you're going to organize a prayer meeting again, we ask you to call the studio and let us announce that. If it's Cookeville, Crossville, if it's Whitley City, London, Corbin, Mount Vernon, wherever, folks will be praying tonight and throughout the day. We're going to continue now our coverage with the SRN Radio Network News on what is happening in America at this time. Again, reminding you, New York City has been hit with terrorists. The World Trade Center, both of those towers have collapsed. Also in Washington, D.C., we see that the Pentagon has been attacked, and much of it has already have collapsed as well. Let's join now the SRN Radio Network News for further coverage of the terrorist attacks in America.
With SRN News, I'm Ken Lormand in Washington. The World Trade Center is no more. The southern tower collapsed with a roar about an hour after this morning's twin plane crashes into the New York City landmark. Then the northern tower went down in flames and billowing smoke. The Associated Press is reporting that American Airlines has told them that one of its flights, flight number 11, had been hijacked and that it was one of the two planes that crashed into the tower. The FAA, meanwhile, has halted all flights in and out of all U.S. airports. Laura Brown is a spokeswoman with the FAA.
There's a national ground stop in place. We issued the ground stop at 9:25 this morning, Eastern Time. And that means that no aircraft are currently taking off. Aircraft that are in the air will be allowed to land. And the ground stop is indefinite.
Elsewhere, the Pentagon has also been struck. A plane crashed into the Pentagon today. An Associated Press reporter saw the tail end of a large airliner plunge into the building. The west wing of the White House and the Capitol building and other buildings in Washington, D.C. are being evacuated amid concerns over terrorist threats. Senior law enforcement officials also say a car bomb has exploded outside the State Department. President Bush vowing to hunt down those responsible.
I have spoken to the Vice President, to the Governor of New York, to the Director of the FBI, and have ordered that the full resources of the federal government go to help the victims and their families and to conduct a full-scale investigation.
Again, a number of what appear to be attacks on several buildings in several cities around the United States, New York and Washington, D.C. principally. This is SRN News. Meanwhile, a large plane has crashed in western Pennsylvania. Officials at Somerset County Airport say the plane went down just north of the airport, about 80 miles southeast of Pittsburgh. As we've been telling you, the scene was unbelievable in New York. For those that were watching as the World Trade Center was hit by two planes, this is an unidentified woman who is not far from the World Trade Center.
It's horrible. It's a sickening thing to see. It's just, I don't even know. It's hard to describe. It's just, it makes you feel sick to look at.
And now there's word that both towers of the World Trade Center have collapsed. The southern tower collapsed with a roar about an hour after this morning's twin plane crashes into the New York City landmark. As we were telling you, the Pentagon has also been hit by a plane, and senior law enforcement officials say a car bomb has exploded outside the State Department. This is SRN News. Joining us now live with an update and a timetable of all that has been happening to try to put it in perspective is SRN's Phil Flashman. Phil?
Ken, mayhem is probably the best way to describe what's going on. Things are changing by the second here. We will do our best to kind of organize what has gone on so far today, as has already been mentioned in this newscast. First, a plane crashes into one of the towers of the World Trade Center in Lower Manhattan before 9 a.m. this morning. A second plane crashes into the second tower shortly after 9 a.m. President Bush in Sarasota, Florida, says it is a national tragedy. An aircraft crashes near the Pentagon, reportedly collapsing part of the U.S. military's headquarters. Government buildings in Washington, including the Capitol and the White House, are evacuated. The FAA shuts down all aircraft takeoffs nationwide. And shortly after 10 a.m., the first of the two Trade Center towers collapses. Shortly after that, the second tower collapses. From Washington, I'm Phil Fleischman.
And this is the King of Kings Radio Network. We'll do our best to continue to keep you informed of what's going on right now throughout the United States, and especially in Washington and New York. We're going to continue with instrumental music, reminding you this is WTHL Somerset, WWOG Cookeville, Tennessee. And again, just as soon as we get some more news feed, we'll do our best to keep you informed of the situation.